this land that we call Dijon. And he's a Mr. Ed, yes, our dear friend. Give it up for Ed Kuharski, who's going to introduce some information, or share some information, and also lead our panel tonight. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks for all being here. It's just a awesome crowd. There's an awful lot of capacity in this room, so let's figure out how to use it in an organized fashion, because we sure do need it. I'm really happy to have our three panelists. We'll introduce them a little bit later, but what I wanted to kick off the evening by showing a brief trip through a little slideshow about the history and current status of Occupy Madison, because I think it represents an alternative vision for how to live on the planet, for how to bring people into housing and community, into harmony with nature, and it's all on a little scale, but you got to start with little seeds and let them grow. And I think what this represents is it's a different path than most all of the other things. Our three speakers can speak to some of the other dimensions of what makes our failure to house everyone persistent. But I think they can also speak to maybe some of their ideas about how we re-engineer our society and our relationship to the planet and to each other in a way that we could stop failing. Because I don't like failure. When you build buildings, they're not supposed to fall down. And it takes a long time to build things, but we're showing right now how easy it is to tear stuff down. And so I think our first step is we got to find effective ways to halt the tearing down. And we got to halt the doing of harm. Our current problem on Willie Street and with one of our now executed homeless residents. It's about doing harm, and it's about being impatient. It's about not recognizing, in my view, that there's a culture of impatience and male supremacy. That white supremacy is really often just male supremacy. And the wrong people are running the world. They have the wrong genitalia, basically. and the wrong hormones to go with it. But that's one way we could fix things. I'm happy to have 2 out of 3 of our speakers that are of probably more suitable leadership stock. But Reverend Couper is also, in my view, he's just one of my lifetime heroes and represents what Madison used to be and what Madison could be again in terms of how our government and our supposed help from government is supposed to work and no longer works. But it could be revived. And the first time Reverend Couper did it happened pretty rapidly. My recollection was about a year between when he arrived and we had this amazing party on State Street the evening that Richard Nixon resigned. It was a spontaneous thing that people gathered and they made a parade up around the square with the temporary horses for the experimental part of the mall on State Street. And then 6 block parties started, one on each block with somebody with a big stereo in the apartment windows. And our cops, who used to be, high school dropouts who like to beat up people, they're with their bike and their shorts. They're standing around eating ice cream for Deadman's and boogieing with the crowd. And what a transformation. So I just know it can happen. And that's I'm so moved to have him here. So I want to start this slideshow. I'll begin the back here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And while it's getting ready, I just want to say, you notice that we are filming The reason is that the Democracy Tour, or the Fight for Our Lives Democracy Tour, has gotten some funding to do a documentary. So everywhere we go around Wisconsin, we're recording the people who are standing up for people, peace, and the planet. And we're passing around a little clipboard. I'll just ask you to pass it around. If it's okay to use your image, you can indicate that by saying yes and put your contact information so that we can contact you if we want to check it out with you, or if so that we can let you know when the film comes out, stuff like that. Thanks. Go ahead, Ed. Okay.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Oh, good. I have no experience with these mics, but we'll try and make it work. Okay, so this is a brief tour through the interesting history of Occupy Madison.
You can do it.
I'm not sure what's that doing here. Ah, there. Okay, I think I'm there. Yeah, so Occupy Madison, it really, its origin started during the uprising against Scott Walker and his middle of the night attempt to subvert democracy up in the Capitol. I met my first homeless people in the Capitol because up until that point, the rotunda of the Capitol and particularly the lunchroom below the rotunda of the Capitol was like basically the day center for homeless people. And it was a very functional and, is this working? I don't know. Can people hear me? Okay, I'll hold this up, okay. So I met my first homeless people when the 5,000 of us moved in and set up an intentional community in the middle of our generously designed Capitol building. And, we recently had something go up on Willie Street that had many similar characteristics. It had all the different services and important features that you need in a functioning village. But my first experience was in that Capitol. We had a small community of 5,000 people with daycare and a library and food and health care and all of that, and plenty of bathrooms. But I'm not reading the mic well, aren't I? All right, so that happened, and then we had what was called Rockerville out on the perimeter of the square, where we had housed people pretended to be homeless as part of the Hoovervilles were during the Depression, and Most Island arranged all of that. But to make that happen, the folks that normally slept out on the terrace around the square all got herded to 1/4 of the square so that the other 3/4 could be occupied by people pretending to be homeless. So it was an interesting, ironic bit of demonstration going on there. And that went on for a couple of weeks. Then we got to the fall of 11 when the Occupy Wall Street movement happened. And a number of us all converged on Meadows Park over here in our neighborhood, and including a number of those folks that I knew from the Capitol Uprising who were roofless. And many of my fellow progressive houses, as we came to call them, were kind of turning their nose up and saying, what are they doing here? And I couldn't understand that because they had more standing to be there as part of the Wall Street, the opposition to Wall Street's enshittification of our world than anyone else there. And by the end of the weekend, that's all who was there. And that's how the Occupy group was formed. After that, they moved to the top of State Street for a few weeks until Freak Fest, when they had to move because that was going to get fenced in for our weird Halloween event. So then they next brilliantly moved to the entrance to Monroe Terrace, the little Olin Park Terrace on Wilson Street, which really got everybody's attention. And that led to the mayor giving permission for the group to move on to the vacated used car lot on East Wash where Don Miller had been, where one of those Gebhardt buildings is now. And that became a 6-month residency on the empty lot, which surprised the mayor because he thought we were probably going to move out when winter hit. We proved him wrong. But, out of all this, a community formed, and that's kind of what this whole story is about here. So what came out is eventually, is that we got chased around the county 32 places. In the summers, we were able to rent campgrounds from the county parks and stay there, but when they closed, then we were back to here comes winter and here's no place legal to be. And our whole battle is from day one and still today is about that there's no place on public lands that the public can dwell if they don't have a place to be on private land. And as you saw again on Main Street, the enforcement of that is pretty harsh. And it's pretty much, oh yeah, thank you. Pretty much the defense of private property rights, especially for real estate and developer interests, trumps human life. And we saw it play out there just recently. But what we've eventually figured out is that we have to surrender and get land because without a lease, title, or mortgage, there's no legal place to be. And so we started looking for a property, and what we have down the street, the next block down, is Occupy Madison's first village, which became the first, actually, campground community of its kind that was able to locate successfully connected to a neighborhood, which is another interesting thing because all the other ones that we could find up to that point, and I think it's still pretty much true, they're always located in violation of the city's own zoning, which requires that you can only live in a residential zone. But all those places elsewhere ignore those rules so that the sensibilities of the already housed would not be offended by having those scary homeless people move into their neighborhood. So we still have a form of like Jim Crow segregation going on about our homeless, who are largely people of color and disabled and so on, so are most vulnerable. And what that really represents is sort of like Jim Crow all over again at some extra expense. It's more expensive to not house people than to house them, is what we have good documentation on. But most people don't know that, and cities don't emphasize that because they only incur some of that cost. It's about $52,000 per person to not house a person currently, and but the city's share of that is only a fraction of that, so they don't have the incentive to solve the problem. But the community is paying that, So right now, our 2,000 point in time counted homeless folks in Dane County, that amounts to $60 million that it's costing all of us. And for about a third of that, we could house everyone at market rate and pay the utilities. So it's kind of illogical, but so is Jim Crow segregation. It was more expensive to maintain segregation in the South than it was to have integration. But it was really important to those that wanted it to maintain someone to be more superior to and to be mean to and to exploit in other ways. And it was a cost willing to be accepted to maintain that white supremacy. But I digress. This is the village down the street when it was new. But it started, like I say, with Reynolds Park, then we moved to Monona Terrace, we moved to East Washington, we set up our first trial at shelters on that Don Miller lot. Later on, we got thrown out of there, and we moved up onto Northport Drive next to the Human Services Building, which led to some Monty Python moments. And eventually, the county came in with 20 police or sheriff's deputies and 12 trucks, and forcibly moved everybody's stuff, and then were going to move the people, but they never did, so we had to bring them up to Token Creek Park where they were being essentially interred like the Japanese during World War II. That was a really interesting. 5 miles from the nearest bus station is where that was. But that's like typically, traditionally, that's the government's solution, so-called, to a homeless. To take them away, hide them, to do whatever you can to minimize their visibility and their impact, but don't solve the problem. So we had, this go on for a couple of seasons. And this was a little part of our stay up there on Lakeview Hill before we went to Token Creek. And you can see the gentleman in the middle on the bottom has a number affixed and duct taped to his jacket, and that same number is attached to the tarp that his tent was wrapped up in that he was supposed to use to reclaim his stuff when they kidnapped everybody up to Token Creek Park. It still blows my mind to think about what was done there. But again, we just had it happen again on Willow Street, so it's not that surprising. We tried a little brief attempt at doing a transitional housing in this building on Fordham Avenue, owned by Mr. Vang, among a refugee who became a refugee services provider. And that made 3 municipalities uncomfortable all at the same time because of the location. And we had Maple Bluff, we had Madison, and we had Town of Bloomington folks all show up in this room in numbers to tell us how unacceptable it was to let anybody be in transitional housing near their precious daughter who wanted to walk through the park to the dance studio next door. That's just sort of white folk stuff. But I had a complete plan. We were going to take it through. But then the next thing that happened was we went to stay on Portage Road on some land that Mr. Vang owned, and that led to a wonderful little confrontation with the zoning department, which felt obligated to enforce their rules, despite the fact that these folks had nowhere to be. And it ended up in a kind of a really interesting bit of drama. So anyway, we started looking for opportunities, and we looked at existing communities out in the Northwest particularly who were kind of ahead of us, and these are some examples. And we rented a 1,000-foot little workshop off of Acewood Boulevard and started building a house despite the fact we had nowhere to put it. But we discovered that you could park on the street anything for if it was you moved it within 48 hours. So that became our plan. We built a house and... Is this better? Is this better? Sorry.
Yes.
I'm no good at mics. So yeah, we rented this little workshop on behind Green Lanes and started figuring out how to build a tiny home. And this is our little tiny home factory. And the first one we built, I ended up on the street for 11 months near the workshop there. And we ran it on 12-volt battery that we changed out each day. And Chris and Betty were our first residents. They were there for 11 months until we finally got some property. But we had an awful lot of volunteers, that came together to make these tiny homes. And along the way, we kind of discovered this is a design thing that we found was very helpful. One of our volunteer members insisted that these shutters and that flower box with the flowers in it and a porch light by the front door were key elements to make this feel like actually a home. And what we found was that really did give people kind of a way in through their heart to understand that this really was a home and these really are people. It was, what we started to discover was that the technical issues and the legal issues, you got nowhere until you could at least start from people's heart. And we had kind of a breakthrough here. At the same time, we had a discussion with the city about what could be a tiny home, and they came up with their technical term, the portable shelter unit, and we negotiated it after they tried to have us be regulated under other DOT rules, because this was going to be, what we had found was
miscellaneous trailers under 3,000 pounds were essentially an area of freedom of design and use. But the city first hoped that the state would say it's an RV, and the state hopefully said, no, we don't think so. Then they said, what about a camper? And the state again said, no, we don't think so. So then the city had to sit down and negotiate with us. So we came up with this definition of a portable shelter unit, and we moved on to a whole process, just like the big time developers in these 10-story projects, to go through the whole, what's called a planned unit development thing. So we had to design our unit and go to urban design and show them our pretty designs. They all had to have aesthetics, reviewed by urban design. All of this great stuff, just like other projects. But we outdid on the community engagement side. We had meetings here at this church that helped us to get our approval. These are some of the steps of construction of our first house, which we tried to build all of pallet wood, which we then understood why you don't do that. But then the high school stepped up, and we had 4 houses built by 3 by LaFollette and 1 by East High, and this is one of them in process over at LaFollette. And it turned the basic construction manual arts class into a service learning project, and so it really benefited these students as much as us, and it was a wonderful thing. So here's the keys getting turned over in the 4th of those things. That's Todd, LaFollette's manual arts teacher, had at the time, handing over a tiny house. This was the site we started with. It was a pretty nasty car dealer or car repair place. And we started our planning and developed our scheme and went through the whole process here now again, selling the city on the design, but then also the neighborhood. So this was us having one of our 5 neighborhood meetings that we had with the neighborhood. And over that 5 meetings, we got 75% opposition to come down to only 2 people who eventually we got 100% approval from all the boards and commissions and the city council, and we went ahead with our project. This is me selling the project up at Bashford Church. And what we found was taking our showpiece house around, it was being lived in by Chris and Betty, but they would graciously let it be hauled around. This is to a neighborhood meeting right here in our parking lot, and let people go in and walk through and kick the tires, and it made a big impact. And, so we built confidence and support from the neighborhood from all that opposition initially, and showing, just showing that if you do a sincere process, people are willing to think about it and talk about it and change their minds. And when we look at this particular project is also a kind of a remediation project. This was back in 1904 when it was still wetlands where we are, and it got all filled with garbage from municipal garbage trucks for years, is what's underneath us right now, on top of the peat bog and the swamp. But I developed the whole thing here to kind of remediate the site, which is contaminated from the gas station and from the auto repair stuff. But we sort of built rain gardens above the pavement rather than digging down and having to remove all that contaminated soil. And so we have a very green site that captures all of its rainwater, except at the driveway, 20-foot driveway there. And it goes along with the idea of what I was trying to create here was a healing environment that connects you to nature, gives you a safe compound, but is also a community, a sociable thing. And it's kind of based on what I learned through Friends of the State Street family who had outreach, clandestine outreach to all the villages that would get set up in the woods campers, kind of naturally formed the same kind of villages that have been going on for 20,000 years in human history. It's 4 or 5 tents and a common tent building with all the food and everything in it. And someone stays there while the others all go off to hunt or nowadays to get a job. And one person guards the village from being raided. And who raids these villages mostly is our police, unfortunately. I think that still goes on. But we developed something that we thought would be, would have these qualities of restoration for the residents and of the site. And I look at it as a kind of a model of sustainable living that if we maybe really ought to be limited about this scale if we want to save the planet. So I don't look at this as poverty housing or a compromise. I look at it actually as an advance from how we are today. So it was all volunteer work, pretty much. We hired Bachman Construction for the more technical parts, but most of it was really done by volunteers and by the villagers themselves. Because it's a community self-help model, and that's very different. And once the infrastructure is here, Brenda Conkle has calculated that the running cost to operate a house in the village here is about $2,500 a year, which is pretty remarkable. Here we are at the ribbon cutting in 2014. It's now 12 years later, and we're doing pretty well. The village supports itself by craft items sold in the store and by a plant sale that Sophia here does, and our holiday sale. And, but at that low overhead, the villagers can pretty much carry the expense on an ongoing basis, while having a relatively decent life. And then we did finally completed the part, so we could not build it initially. So like we had a kitchen in the sawdusty workstation shop for 7 years, I think it was. Eventually we got a new little addition off the back and an extra bathroom and things, and now it's a nice setup for 9 people. And then at about the same time, we designed and launched a very quick schedule this second village up on Abraham Avenue in front of Ricky's Bar, and that was for 28 huts that are set to convert now to 22 tiny houses in a nice similar compound, but on a little bit bigger scale. And then we have a third village going now, and this is the factory that's just getting set up now in the basement of 201 Stoughton Road at our third village to start building houses in earnest. It's been delayed due to just not insufficient funds, but we're ready to start building 46 more houses. We need 22 for each of the second and third villages, and we need several for the first village, where we've got a couple of missing ones. And here it is, the first frame of the prototype new house. Ready to go up in what we call the assembly building. It's just like NASA. They build all the parts in the basement, and they bring them up to this garage to assemble the house. That's better than it used to be, where we could only go so far indoors, and we had to go outside to put the roof on. But the question remains, and I think that's what our panel wants to talk about next now, is we still have all of these legal barriers, we have these attitudinal barriers, we have the culture of fear and just false accusation and mischaracterization of who homeless people are and what they're like and what their behavior is. They're treated as a scary other when that's not really who they are at all. I don't know how we can be so afraid of our most disempowered people in the community, but that seems to be how it's enacted. And I have suspicions why that's fostered, but we'll go into that later. Anyway, thanks.
Okay, well, we have some panelists, including Ed. We're going to lead a community discussion about homelessness, about unnecessary violence, and things like that, and how we hopefully will lead us to thinking more about how we can make changes in our community. So I invite all the panelists to come up. If you've made your name placard, you can put it wherever you're sitting. Oh, and if you don't have one, there's a couple. I'm sorry, I need to get the markers to you. I meant to do that. Get to make your own name. We're a highly organized, efficient group here. We make sure we don't spell anyone's name wrong, so we give them the name card. Turn this over to Ed, who's our moderator and panelist both.
If they spell their own name wrong, that's their fault.
That's right.
Well, you know, we're just enacting a community self-help model, just like we do at the village. You know, and that's an important difference. We should be doing for ourselves. This idea that the only solution is through government. You know, Heidi does what she can for government, but we all know the limitations. And the only reason that first village got done is because we asked for no government support or help. We only asked them to get out of the way. And, you know, our whole issues were about negotiating what they were going to allow us to do and how we were going to get through all the regulatory stuff. And we just chose to overpower them we responded stronger than all the for-profit developers ever have in terms of our community engagement, and the quality of our planning, I think, was at the same level as those big towers, just not so fancy a rendering, and not so big a budget. But the fact that we didn't ask for anything but a path to approval is how the village got done. It might not even exist today if we had said, well, first we get some grant money, and first we have to get the government to want to help us and stuff. So it's better to just decide what you want to do, set your goal, and worry about the fact that it's an unreasonable proposition after that. Things only get done if you decide they're going to get done. Somebody has to say, it's getting done. And that's what this group did. And I think that's a much more effective model than, but well, maybe we can get a little more baby steps like Sudan used to say. Or, well, this year's budget, it's really tight, but we'll squeeze another $1 million into a health fund. And that's not to discount Heidi's efforts particularly, because it's gotten better. But we're not going to get home if we go incrementally and if we only do what we think we can, or what's already recognized as possible. We need to do the impossible because the possible is inadequate. I was just in Poland for a couple of weeks in June. They have zero homelessness, and they're not the only country that like that. They have an effective program that uses the police to find homeless people, and within a week or two they're found. They're brought into a system that gives them housing and health care and puts them, connects them to job training on the first day. So they're converted into productive citizens, and they can afford it because they realize if you do a full job of restoring people, it doesn't cost money, it saves money. And that $52,000 I was talking about earlier is what you save, and it's it's totally supportable and scalable. They have absorbed 2 million Ukrainians during this conflict in Ukraine. And they're not real buddies with the Ukrainians. But Ukrainians not real buddies with them because they've been colonized for years by the Poles. But they, that's a country of 80 million making it work way better than here. And so I know that from being there, and I know from being old enough to know that, it's way better before 1980 in so many ways. And most of it, you have to be old enough to have experienced that. And even those of us that are that old tend to forget, that but we need to hold on to that vision. David Couper comes from a period when things really worked in so many important ways, and he had a lot to do with this, some dimensions of that. But I'm so happy that to have him on this panel because, it's just people need to understand that we could have it way better than we got it, and we need to stop selling. So, I think you probably all pretty much know about Dr. Couper, or Reverend Couper. He was a U.S. Marine, he was a police officer, a detective in Minneapolis, and then he came to be police chief in Madison in '72. And by the time Nixon resigned in August of '74, we had a peace force instead of a police force. And we can do that again. And we can speak to that more, I guess. Amadi Ozier, I'm just meeting her today. She's an assistant UW professor in English department at UW, specializes in Black American literature and performance, which as a recovering theater person I appreciate. And in the Madison community, she continues her housing advocacy work that she's done elsewhere with the Tenant Power group. And I'm really happy to have her here. Here's what she has to offer. And then we've got Heidi Wegleitner, our longtime, amazing District 2 County Supervisor. She's a public interest attorney by day, representing low-income and at-risk tenants in eviction proceedings. So trying to prevent homelessness on the front end of that process. That's designed to take people's homes away. It's designed to put people on the street. It's part of what I call this malicious economy, which has a long history, but has gotten weaponized to a new, unprecedented level under the current control of these billionaires that are water government. I think we're having a new Gilded Age. Before the progressive era with La Follette, the legislature was owned by the robber barons and the steel barons and all that. The Gilded Age was all about Carnegie and Rockefeller and all those guys owning everything and letting little crumbs drop to the floor for the rest of us. It took 20 years for La Follette in this state to turn it around and create a different world that we, at my age, we benefited hugely from those changes and reforms. And then they started getting eroded in the 90s, about the same time that Chief Couper left the police force here. I don't look at the 90s as a bright spot in the history of our world. But it's not that long ago and we can turn it around. Heidi's done so many amazing things on the government side and in her advocacy for the community. I'm just happy to have her here. So I guess I want to open it up to Dr. Couper.
We'd wind up in violence. Why violence always?
Certainly. Hi, everybody. I'm Amadi. I'm with Madison. I'm with Madison Tenant Power, which is a tenant advocacy organization in town. So I was taking notes while you're talking about Occupy Madison. A couple of things I was thinking about was, first of all, there's this really popular law in Scotland and other places now called the right to roam, which is a legal standard which sort of governs people's rights to public land, which is that the government, if there is no law against it, you have a right to be there. Which I was thinking about just in the context of here is that it's illegal to camp on public land without permission in Wisconsin, and so a lot of the criminalization of homelessness is also criminalization of you just occupying public space if you don't also have a home, right? The other thing I was thinking about too, with thinking just about the vigil site, the vigil site at Willow Street in Baldwin, is that a lot of the there was a pretty intense sweep of the vigil site, I think it was Wednesday morning or Tuesday morning, and the people who were arrested who were homeless were treated much, 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 much worse than the people who were arrested who had homes. And I don't have to be graphic or anything like that, but the way people treat your property when you don't also have a home, they treat your property like like it's trash. And I just want you to like imagine what it would be like for somebody to throw all of your things away because they've decided that they're not worth enough. Right. The last thing I was thinking about while we were talking was about Corey Ruiz, who was the man who was killed. And I know that Ruiz's family doesn't really want us to think about Ruiz as homeless. Like that's not probably how he would call himself. But a lot of the people at the vigil who were homeless, he knew, like they knew each other, and he's experienced homelessness. He's gone through homeless services, and more importantly, like I talked to people at the vigil site, people who were homeless at the vigil site, who were like, well, he had a place to stay. He was couch surfing. He could always stay at his baby mama's house, etc. Which I want us to know, and the last thing I'll put on the table before I pass it on, is that hidden homelessness is another kind of homelessness. And it's one that's like really under discussed here in Madison, which is like doubled up housing, right? Couch surfing, crashing in somebody else's house, people occupying too little space because there isn't enough money to go around is a kind of homelessness. And it's a kind of homelessness that's like under discussed, under talked about.
Thank you. And it's underreported and it's underfunded because we have like such little funding to respond to and end homelessness. The money we get from the federal government is highly prioritized, and so there really is no money locally for homeless assistance grants for folks in that type of homelessness, doubled up homelessness. I'm Heidi Wegleitner. I've represented this district here since 2012 on the Dane County Board. I've been a tenants' rights lawyer for over 20 years, and a lot of what I've worked on the county board has been around housing affordability and stability and dignity and support for people experiencing homelessness. And it feels like even though so much has happened in the last 14 years in the area of expanded homeless services and pretty significant investments by the city and the county in affordable housing, we're still having these same basic needs and not being met in our community. People are still experiencing human rights violations every day, where they don't have a place to go to the bathroom. They don't have, access to a drinking fountain. We have benches that have been removed from our public buildings because we don't want them to be welcoming and inclusive. There's no legal place to sleep. These are things that don't even really cost money. But they divide us, and they send messages to some of our neighbors that they should not be seen. And that, and that is so dangerous for people in that situation not to have the safety of being able to be visible, being able to sleep next to other people who can help to protect their property and their security, and to have to hide. Or they'll be, pushed away, pushed somewhere else, or, locked up in jail. So, anyway, I can talk about like all the solutions, but like I was in a meeting yesterday with some advocates, and we were literally talking about getting porta potties and getting the drinking fountain on at State Street again, like such basic things. And we really need a lot of people to elevate these issues, because having access to bathrooms, like having access to drinking water, that helps all of us, not just people without housing. It helps all of us, right? And we have to, this is what building unity is all about, right? Recognizing that we all benefit when all of our basic human needs are being met. So I'm honored to be here tonight with these awesome panelists. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I don't know if you know or not, we have in nearby Mount Horeb, we have little water bowls for the animals that pass by on the sidewalk. No, okay. Why can't we just be kind to one another? I mean, you know, I'm getting a little old for this now. You know, it's, I just celebrated my 88th birthday and I am getting tired. I'm getting tired. So I still have a little piss vinegar left for one more time here. And that is, I've been arguing and writing, and I taught 2 years down in Platteville, trying to teach young kids from nice white Wisconsin, southwest area there, who are going to be police officers, to think about race. And and I ended up quitting over that one issue because they didn't want to hear about race, and they tried to do everybody they could think of. So anyway, I've been writing a blog since 2011. There's 1,600 posts on there. It's hard to believe. Got contacts from 134 nations around the world, and we've had like 750 views of that blog, and still nothing happens. So I'm tired. I'm tired of working in the system. I want you to get on my blog. It's called improvingpolice.blog. Improvingpolice.blog. There's a white paper on there that talks about, you know, what needs to happen. The title is, if Europe can do it, why can't we? If Europe can impose training and policies and to reduce violent behavior by police under a standard of absolute necessity, why can't we? So what we have is the weirdest situation. I can't get anybody to really understand what's going on. So in 1972, when I came to Madison, Wisconsin state law permitted police to use deadly force on any fleeing felon. Any fleeing felon. So we started talking about this. Perhaps was a time when a lot of kids were stealing cars, but we don't want to kill kids stealing cars. So, working with the law school, Frank Remington was there then, Harvey Goldstein, we were entering a new area of administrative rulemaking, policy. We said, well, the state law permits police to shoot fleeing felons, but you don't have to permit your officers to do that. You could write an administrative policy. And that's what we did. Now, at first, the police backed off a little bit. You cheat on, what if I shoot somebody? I said, well, you know, you're not gonna go to jail, but you're probably not gonna be working here anymore. So you decide what you want to do. Even conservative police can learn to follow the rules, and you can train them. They may not like it. Like I said, I don't care what's going on in your brain, I'm just care about your behavior. So you can have all kinds of bad feelings and bad thoughts and things, but let's not have your behavior. So about a decade later, in Tennessee versus Garner, U.S. Supreme Court decision said, that's right, police are not to use deadly force except to stop one who presents an immediate danger to the community. And that was pretty good. But in the meantime, a lot of police agencies around the country, we talked about, made those rule changes. So my point is today, this low standard that came out in 1989, when I was still we didn't pay any attention to Graham versus Connor, Graham v. Connor, which is the low bar Supreme Court decision about when police can use deadly force, and that is when it is objectively reasonable. Whatever the heck that means, but objectively reasonable is why our district attorney, for the last decade, absolved police using force, because all you gotta say is, I'm scared. I'm scared. And nothing is looking at it before that moment, before the triggers pulled, what were the circumstances. So in the in Europe, European Commission on Human Rights is the one who has made the point of getting 47 European countries to sign on to the absolute necessity standard of using deadly force. And of course, it works. I mean, some countries don't shoot anybody. Sometimes they don't shoot anybody. Maybe 3 or 4 people in Germany or in the UK. France maybe a few, but nothing like the 1,000 people that we kill every year. And ratcheting all the way back to Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, we never knew how many people were killed by police in this country. It was an unknown statistics.
It's not documented.
And journalists got together and they said, we're going to start counting them. And so we've been counting since that time, 1,000 or more every year. I think the last year it perked up a little bit, 1,100. And that's an unacceptable number. So I've tried to talk to the police. I've tried to get them to stand up in each of these shootings that we all know about. There's one shooting that I missed, and that was Ashley B. Piazza, a veteran who was suicidal, who was in her one-room apartment with one door, in the bathroom, 2 officers talking to her, suicidal. She walked out of the bathroom, not pointing her weapon at the officer alongside, and a 3rd officer came in and killed her. Now that cost us $3 million, just like Tony Robinson was $3 million, just like Paula Heenan was $3 million. But see, it doesn't come out of your taxpayer account. It doesn't hurt any of us as citizens who are paying taxes around here, because it comes out of the statewide insurance fund. So everybody has it hurt. So I'm just going to wind up. I wish you would get on that blog and read this white paper on what's going on, about why the Stanford Law School just last year put on an 84-page standard police use of force policy, and nobody's talking about it. And I've got a number of references there showing that the police in Europe have lower health issues because they're not killing people all the time. And then one that I also stressed with police, I said to police leaders, I said, if you care about your police officers, you're going to train them and equip them so they don't have to kill people. Because when they kill people, they suffer a moral injury. And they're afraid of suicide, losing their career, their relationships, addiction, depression. It's the end of their career for most people. If they can look back at those officers, most of them are not around anymore. And it's a terrible oversight. So I've argued to a number of police chiefs who have come after me over the years, and I know we've got a really strong union in this town. And I talked to a few alders who told me the less they could support the Madison Professional Police Officers Association, but they probably aren't going to get voted in anymore. So I think it's all about politics now. And this is what I propose. I think we need to form a coalition. Now, is it building unity? Perhaps. I would like to see an interfaith coalition along with civic leaders, and we get together and we make this mayor, who is the head of the police department, ask her to raise the standard as proposed in my paper. Not being able to do that, there's an election this April, and there should not be a person running for the mayor of this city that does not make a commitment to when he or she is elected will raise the deadly force standard in the city. So I work inside enough, it's time out for politics. And I don't know a lot about politics, but I know that people matter. I know that this is a This is a city that one time was thought to be one of the best police departments in the country. A city that ought to help other police departments how to do their job and in all other areas. So please, let's work on this. Let's do this and make this happen. And I'm going to be talking tomorrow at another UU church. It's the Free Church out in Sauk. They're going to be talking about the importance of sanctity of life and the role that police officers have morally to be the people who protect our lives. And so when ICE was about to come into here in great numbers, I tried to get everybody together and say, look, the police need to tell, the sheriff needs to tell the community that if ICE comes in here and tries to kill us as they did in Minneapolis, that the police are going to stop and step in. Because once they exceed their authority, they have no right to do what they do. They can do the scope of their authority, but if they break into houses illegally, not having the proper warrant, when they use excessive force, we can charge them under state law. And nobody wanted to tell people that. Because how about an immigrant person sitting there right now who's got some documentation problems? Who's going to protect them? They have no protection unless local police stand up that we're going to protect you. Your lives matter. End of story. So please, think deeply about this. Do talk to everybody you can about the mayor's in charge of the police department. The mayor can order the police chief to do this.
Just one thing, or before the pre-thing of what I was going to say is that the mayoral election next year is definitely going to be contested, so, get involved. But what I was going to say, a through line between what both David and Ed is saying about cost, like, I'm not really like a business person, like there's a moral argument to be had, but there is a cost-based argument to be had, both about disinvesting from police violence and disinvesting in homelessness, right? So in Houston, they sort of they adopted housing first as a model. So housing first meaning house everybody, no questions asked, not saying you have to get into addiction services, or we won't give you housing, or you have to get clean, or we won't give you housing, etc. Housing first. And the way that they got the businesses, Houston is a very tech business thing. They went into these meetings and got allies of hospital execs and the smallest businesses on those streets to say well, there's actually a huge loss from homelessness here, right? We lose business. We have to pay for the ER visits. We have to pay for the arrests, when people are arrested and put into jail instead of put into housing. All that stuff adds up, and it actually costs you less money, to just give them a house. Right? That was very convincing to the Houston technocrats, etc. So just thinking about that framing of the fact that there's an insurance fund to pay for police killings. That's how much it costs. Is a different kind of framing as well.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, very great.
Thank you very much, because I've been making this argument recently that, now that I've updated the numbers, and this $52,000 number that I've been quoting is basically escalated from a study that Obama's Housing Urban Development Director, our secretary, commissioned back in 2012. And that in 2012, the average cost of a community of not housing a person for a year was $40,000.
Yeah.
But that's $52,000. And exactly what I was talking about is all of those costs that are visited on various parts of the community. The city doesn't account for those. The city only looks at their costs, and they're already. I can't believe that it's hard to put my head around the number they're quoting. They're saying it was $1 million to have occupation of a street for 2 weeks. I don't know how it was since they never showed up. The one thing they did right was stay away for 2 weeks. The one thing they did really wrong was then show up in force, like an occupying
That, I
force.
don't understand that per se, just like you don't.
What?
I'm like, for the price on that, I'm like, I can't wrap
Well,
my-
the only way I can frame it is that it was very expensive to have segregation in the South too. And it was very expensive to have apartheid in South Africa. It was not an economic decision to go that way. It was choosing to have an uneconomic system because you got something else for it. You got your sense of superiority. You got your unearned privilege by being a white person, and you didn't have to do anything to earn it. And the government would go ahead and be horrible to people because it made you feel better, right? I mean, that's the only way I can understand it.
Then it made me feel better.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make me feel better. It doesn't make me feel better to have, the reductions in what we minimally have had for homeless supports. In the past year, we've had Dairy Drive closed. That was 30 shelters. We had Tellurian cut back their services, including closing detox for a while. We had St. Vincent de Paul closed Port St. Vincent. We had Porchlight sell their 132 unit YMCA building on Brook Street and build a 70 unit tower over here on East Wash. And the only way I've heard it explained is that gave them a load of cash so that they could support running the inadequately sized men's men's homeless shelter, which is not even a day shelter now. And but what I saw through that this past year is our streets are starting to look like early Bangladesh. We've got somebody sleeping against the front wall of Cargo Coffee on East Wash. We're having it's not hidden anymore. It's very visible. People who are just absolutely ruthless. There's so that portable shelter unit term that we came up with the city years ago. I coined a new term in the last year or so. I call it portable non-shelter units because that seems to be city policy, and they take several forms. One is all your stuff in a wheelchair, and you push it around, and then you sleep in it at night with your stuff next to it, or all your stuff in a walker, or all your stuff in a bar or grocery cart, and occasionally all your stuff in a burley, the trailer, your bike trailer that your child's supposed to be in, but it's all your worldly possessions that will then be thrown away by the police if they decide to do a 4:30 in the morning raid after saying they will show up peacefully for what the mayor promised was a respectful transition to start at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday for cleaning up one day and moving people on the next day. Instead, that first day they showed up at 4:30 in the morning in force, and and as soon as they had a pretext to call in the police force, they did, and they had the state police. I'm still aspiring just to get contact with somebody in the governor's office about the state police.
Yeah.
State police were after there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy.
Well, and they claim that this $1 million doesn't even include the state police because that mutual aid stuff that you get from all the, I think is it 12 different police agencies that have mutual aid agreements that might be called to help in Madison. They don't charge. Normally, the other municipalities don't charge for that. They
Right.
just,
Right.
so it's somehow we spent $1 million only on the Madison police part of it.
Can I answer?
Yeah, kind of look how efficient we were.
Oh, yeah. You gotta
How
ask.
efficient at getting all those poor people off the street so we don't have to look at them. It's so efficient.
That's right.
So you have to think about what happened at the vigil at Willie Street and Baldwin, not just in terms of the raid in that morning. So there were 100 MPD officers plus the state patrol officers. There were 100 MPD officers that morning. And then there was also continuous detail of that intersection throughout that day, throughout the next 4 days, right? And then, so there's never fewer than 10 police officers in that intersection for 4 days. And then they also had police cars. I live 5 blocks away. The police cars circling every 15 minutes, different cars. So had to have 15 cars in a perimeter, a wide perimeter. I live on Ingersoll, so it's a wide perimeter. That was happening for 4 or 5 days. They had surveillance. They had multiple people, had police cars parked in front of their houses. I think that adds up, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
It's a lot of overtime, for those, officers. And, I believe, it's my understanding that the Dane County Sheriff, who I've had plenty of disagreements with over the years, but it's my understanding that, when asked for mutual aid, Dane County Sheriff said, no, we're not doing that. And, Dane County was not interested in contributing to that approach. Dane County did provide some food to people who were put up in hotels for a short stay when that area was cleared. But we did not contribute to those hotels. We do have money for emergency hoteling for people during like severe weather. But this was a action that an emergency that the city created in response to what was, by and large a peaceful memorial and demonstration. So that's my understanding. That is good. We are though constantly in tension with not enough money to meet people's needs here in Dane County and in the city of Madison, and we're headed into a very challenging budget period again. And the sheriff has a real tough time recruiting and retaining deputies. And you hear a lot about how the morale of law enforcement officers is low for reasons that David mentioned, and Amadi. And I think when we can't fill those positions, and we pretty much always have about at least 30 vacant deputy positions, we can find other ways to use those resources to address unmet needs in our community. And so last year in the Dane County budget, I had proposed to eliminate 28 vacant deputy positions because they were just never going to get filled, and free up that funding then to invest in homeless services, invest in another immigration affairs social worker, support human services, which we're experiencing a disproportionate cut from our county executive's budget proposal. Now, that actually passed the oversight committee for the sheriff's office, the Public Protection and Judiciary Committee, on like a split vote, but it passed, which was quite shocking to me because I have introduced many budget amendments over the years to reduce a much smaller amount of deputies, and they had not been successful. So that amendment didn't make it all the way through to the county board's adopted budget. But what was successful was a compromise where the savings from maintaining 20 vacancies, requiring the sheriff not to fill those 20, he wasn't going to do it anyway. That money then was reallocated into our human services system that helped to reduce the cuts on all of our providers, including critical mental health services that we need so much more of those services. We need a crisis triage center when you call non-law enforcement crisis response, like the CARES team, they actually have a place to bring people. That's not jail, right? So we're gonna have to have that conversation again. We're gonna have to pass a budget again that hopefully will enable us to mitigate the harm from continuing to cut our human services providers. So anyways, budget season is coming up, there's public hearings and there's lots of opportunities to get involved and to contact your county board supervisors and also with the, the city council to talk about how investing in care for people and housing is public safety, right?
Blessings of salary savings. I remember.
Thank you for all of that. A couple items that are in play right now that we're trying to get some progress on is an overflow shelter because we optimistically undersized the about to open men's shelter on the Bartolon Drive. And, it's this beautiful sanitary, aesthetically attractive place inside that still has great shortcomings. For one thing, the acoustics in there are horrible, and it's going to need to get fixed because that's just going to jangle everybody's nerves. It's still open wards. 100 years ago, we got rid of open wards in hospitals for important reasons because contagion, both physical and mental, travel in an open ward. And that's why we went first to double rooms and then to single rooms in hospitals. Because it just doesn't work to have those other ones. But we still have the non-functional open ward for our shelters. And there's no reason it has to be that way. It's just a lack. There are reasons cited that are, I think, invalid about how we have to have supervision of everybody. Because it's a carceral environment that's created. It's a version of jail instead of a respectful housing environment that gets created. Because there's this belief that people will prey on each other and all this stuff. Well, it's because you didn't give them a little box that's their own where they can close the door. That's what people really want. The Japanese have those micro hotels. It's like being on the train, three high. A little box you crawl into.
6 by 3 at the most.
Yeah, it's like in a bunk bed and when you're a kid only it's a little enclosure, right? But you can close the door. It's got everything you need in there except the bathroom. And, we could be building those, I think, for the same cost of what we just built. And it would function way better. There are going to be all kinds of problems and all kinds of reinforcement of what's perceived as the pathologies of being homeless that are created by the environment. I'm an architect and I believe in the importance of an appropriate environment. And, when I worked for 28 years doing medical facilities, I learned a few things about what works and what doesn't work to support human performance and to support people under stress, to be able to be calm. The colors in that new shelter are good. They are calming colors, but the acoustic environment cancels all of that.
Yeah.
And the openness, you won't be able to sleep in darkness, which is physiologically wrong, bad. And there will still be all kinds of opportunity for some to prey on others. And there's this idea that you have to have supervision actually creates that environment. The Beacon has become a kind of a predatory place. I do my morning office hours at Cargo Coffee nearby the Salvation Army and the Beacon and the Porchlight Building. And especially the ladies from Salvation Army come in there every morning and I hear their stories, and my puppy ministers to them. We have a functional, good, positive environment at Cargo Coffee. Thank you, Lindsay Lee.
What scared me about the Baldwin and Williamson Street encampment is there were no police. Where are the police? Why? But the police need to protect people that are down here.
And the police are scared.
The absence of the police was pretty.
Well, actually, we thought that was a positive because because we were caring for ourselves. I was there every day.
You got 40 police officers against 1,000 protesters. The cops are like, screw this. We ain't doing nothing.
Well, I think they took the constructive suggestion of, it's okay to hang close by, but it's just going to provoke things for you to come in
Right.
here.
They don't, I've seen it
And
in New York City, Manhattan.
Yeah.
And if they provoke a crowd, things go haywire.
And they did.
If they leave them alone, it's every, copacetic. It's not too bad.
Exactly. What my assessment of that but sort of a spontaneous village, similar to the one in the Capitol earlier, is that it was highly functional, and the only thing that was a problem was it wasn't viably located to stay there. And if there had been an offer of a place to just move the whole thing, as close to intact as possible, we would be looking at a brilliant success right now and way less cost. But that's not what got done. Instead, it became provoked by our mayor and her minions to turn it into a conflict, and she escalated this thing. You know, she needs to de-escalate herself. She needs also to find her heart. That's what's really missing here.
Liz has something. The culture of the police department is awful. Right now, they are not in compliance with the monitors, and they're breaking the law, and they're using dogs that bite, and it's 30 times more on black people than white people that these dogs are sicked on. And the culture is just, they're into protecting themselves. And, that's why they show up in riot gear and do escalate these situations. And it's awful. And the mayor is the head of our police department, and she does nothing about this. I don't think she has a heart.
No, that's what I think is missing. She does plenty, but what she does is kind of engineer the harm. And it's so completely opposite of what she ought to be doing. Our state constitution and our national talk about, the purpose of government is public health, safety, and welfare. It's not about public harm and unsafety and lack of welfare. All those things have gotten defined as a legitimate purpose of government, and they are not, and they should be resisted. I've been trying to have a conversation with the governor's office because the morning after that horrible ambush, I went by there and stopped at that corner. There were 4 ladies placing flowers back in that little circle on the street, and they had some of them were in pots. Madison police were there and said, "You can't have the pots there." So they moved them off onto the curb, leaving just the flowers. But as I was with my puppy crossing the crosswalk to leave, up coming from East Walk direction on Baldwin came this phalanx of 12 state patrol in their military black uniforms, armed. They had their tasers, they had their guns, they had their billy clubs, and one of them had the rifle with the orange stock indicating less lethal ammunition in this rifle. It's a long rifle, and they're marching up to do something to these 4 ladies, I guess. But they would, and they marched in formation. They would not speak to me, so they had identification. But otherwise, they were acting like ICE. It was a horrible thing. So then I called the district office up in DeForest and talked to their commander, and he said, that's their training. Tells you what our problem is. Their training is to become a military force, and and to not be your friend. And they refused to talk to me. They would not even look at me. We don't need those kind of people in our. No one needs that in the community. That's like having the Nazis move in, right? I was appalled, and now I'm having trouble getting anyone in the governor's office to talk to me about it. And the second reply after the form letter to my form that you have to fill out, you can't talk to a human and walk up there anymore. Even their walker, you could do that. But the second one came. We've looked at your concern, and we think you need to talk to the local, the mayor and your alder about this. It's unbelievable to me. So
People united will never be defeated.
yeah, double that, right? Yes. So anyway, Davey Meyer's gonna, I think, apparently has effective control of the state police or something. Anyway, I'm not done with them, but you just need to understand that we have problems at more than one level of our police system and our government. Okay, well, thanks. Any more questions? This has been wonderful. I appreciate you all coming and your attention.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks everybody for being here. We have work to do. Let's do it. Let's do it.
That's great. All right.
Yeah, really nice to meet you. I've heard so many things for so many years. Not lost my work.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna get bring the food in. They want to do that.
Messy.
$10 million is